Within my first year at First Unitarian, back in 2010, I learned a few things that were presented as central to who we are as a congregation. I heard about Dr. Joseph Priestley escaping England as his lab and home were burned down by those who opposed his Unitarian beliefs. And I learned that our first minister, Reverend William Henry Furness, was such a fiery abolitionist speaker that he often preached with armed guards. These stories, among others, have become so central to our identity as one of the oldest continually operating churches in our denomination. In my first year at seminary, I have learned that many of these stories that we hold close to our heart are actually much more complex. It is true that we owe a great deal of gratitude to Dr. Joseph Priestley. While he is known outside of UU circles as the discoverer of oxygen, which led to modern day carbonation, his guidance to a small group of like-minded non-Trinitarians in 1796 supported them in founding our church. Dr. Priestley was actually chased out of London due to his pro-revolutionary views, and he continued to preach Unitarianism in other parts of England for 3 years before making his way to Philadelphia. The story that is rarely told in our congregation, however, is that Priestley's theology was considered so radical at the time that the emerging Boston Unitarians feared being associated with his views, which is one of the reasons the word Unitarian was not used in the naming of the early Boston congregations, while it was used in our own church. What does the story of our founding look like if we focus less on the honor of our long lineage and more on thinking well outside of the box? What would be the equivalent to these radical theological views? We are a non-creedal faith. We do not have a required set of theological beliefs, but we do have a shared set of beliefs in humanity and in how our faith calls us to respond to today's moral crises. As is stated in our first of 7 principles, grounded in historical universalism, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This is radical theology, and we should be proud to champion it. The core beliefs of Unitarian Universalism do not permit us to have a passive faith, particularly in our modern world. Our second story regards Reverend Furness, who was our first settled minister and longest tenured one with a 50-year span in First Unitarian's pulpit. We celebrate Reverend Furness for good reason, and we are honored to still be using the building today that was designed by his son, Frank. The story that we have been told regarding Reverend Furness holds up to the historical record. It is true that he was an ardent abolitionist known in the Philadelphia political scene. In the years leading up to the Civil War, congregants began to fear for their safety and for that of their minister, and many carried weapons while sitting in the pews, and some even surrounded Reverend Furness while he preached. In conducting research this past year, I was surprised to learn of a key part of his story that is rarely discussed. While discourse was crucial at this time of political and cultural change, Reverend Furness also lived into his values by turning the cellar of his Philadelphia home into a stop on the Underground Railroad. What do we lose when we only focus on the power of our past ministers' rhetoric? I fear that in only remembering Reverend Furness as a great orator, rather than also a man of action, that we do not realize the true legacy of our church. In today's world, it is vital that we shed light on what those in power are pushing into the shadows and that we step into on the ground action. For example, right now, the United States and Minnesota governments are protecting the Line 3 tar sands pipeline construction that is proceeding through the sovereign land of the Anishinaabe people in northern Minnesota. In support of the Stop Line 3 campaign, we must preach about our government's repeated violations of promises made to Indigenous people. At the same time, we must also provide more tangible support, whether that is offering financial assistance to the water protectors or, if possible, going to Minnesota, joining the communities of people of faith on the ground in solidarity with the Anishinaabe people, bringing the eyes of the world onto our country's continued systematic breaking of its promises to the people who have lived on this land long before any white people did. The final story I wish to visit this morning does not involve our congregation specifically, but rather the Association of Unitarian Universalist Churches of which we are a part. General Assembly, or GA, as it is often referred to, will be wrapping up this afternoon after an incredible 5 days at which I've excitedly soaked up all that our fellow UUs have had to offer. When I first learned of GA over 5 years ago, I was introduced to the concept of the Ware Lecture. This is an address to the entire gathered delegation, but also a message live streamed by the UUA to all Unitarian Universalists across the country. As UUs, we love to celebrate the big names who have come to speak over the years. And I will be the first to admit that Stacey Abrams and Desmond Meade were absolutely incredible last night. But how much is lost when we only remember the names and not the message? Right after I was told about the Ware Lecture in 2015, I was excitedly told that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been a Ware lecturer in 1966. As an involved Unitarian Universalist, I have now heard the story many times. What I rarely hear, however, is that Dr. King's talk was titled, quote, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution," and was a plea to our 5-year-old denomination to take action, to join as accomplices, not just allies in this movement. Unitarian Universalists had marched in Selma 1 year before, including Reverend James Reed, whose life was taken by violent white people who showed up in opposition. That can never be erased. But by 1966, there was more to be done. Dr. King came to the UUA out of respect, both for the UU clergy who had stood with the movement 1 year before, and for the genuine interfaith relationships that had been forged. But he also came to ensure that as UUs, we did not think that we were done. Sometimes we get so lost in the feel-good message of the hero's story, so excited by our proximity to greatness, that we lose sight of the takeaway message of the moment. For example, the following year, Black Unitarian Universalists gathered as the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus to call for changes within the UUA to support the many Black members of congregations around the country and to push the UUA to take a firmer stance regarding the civil rights movement. Our denomination's failure to support the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus over the next 5 years a decision which came to be known as the empowerment controversy, led to a mass exodus of Black Unitarian Universalists from our faith tradition, and admittedly is a topic for a whole other sermon. The full text of Dr. King's speech can be found on the UUA's website, and I strongly encourage you to read it. Read it through the lens of the ways we did not show up after 1966, both for the broader movement and for our own fellow UUs. In respect to the brilliance of Reverend Dr. John Burens, who graced our pulpit just 2 weeks ago, I agree that our history is an important part of who we are. We should celebrate the legacy of our 225-year-old congregation by honoring the nuanced stories of those who came before. At the same time, it is crucial that we do not let ourselves get entrenched in the prestige of our longevity. We are more than these stories, and if we only lift them up for self-accolade by proxy, then we have failed in their missions. It is time now. It is time that we hear the stories of our past as a call to action and create the transformative society we want to see. As UUA President Reverend Susan Frederick Gray said this past week, quote, "This is no time for a casual faith." I am preaching this to you now because I believe that we can step into this moment and that we can live into our faith as Unitarian Universalists. What will we do with this call? Amen. Blessed be.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.